Judge Miller had just purchased his dream home, a quiet house with a stunning garden he intended to fill with rare orchids. It was meant to be his sanctuary, a refuge from the relentless pressures of Courtroom. But that peace didn't last long. The very day he moved in, he met Carol, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood and president of the Homeowners Association. Carol lived next door and had opinions about everything, from the shade of his mailbox to the precise height of his lawn. Miller, patient by nature, made every effort to be cordial. He smiled, waved, and complied with the steady stream of notices she taped to his door. Yet Carol's demands grew stranger by the week. She declared his award-winning roses were too bright and disrupted the neighborhood's tasteful aesthetic. She insisted his wind chimes, a sentimental gift from his late wife, were a public nuisance. Miller calmly explained that his property adhered to every HOA bylaw, but Carol refused to be reasoned with. The true conflict centered on a magnificent century-old oak tree that stood proudly along the property line between their homes. Miller adored the tree. Its wide branches offered cooling shade and shelter for countless birds. Carol, however, viewed it as a threat. She claimed its leaves clogged her gutters and its roots endangered her foundation. She demanded it be removed. Miller declined but tried to compromise. He offered to hire a certified arborist to trim any branches extending over her yard, and even volunteered to install gutter guards at his expense. Carol dismissed the suggestion with a cold scoff. "That tree is an eyesore," she snapped, "and it's coming down one way or another." Several days later, Miller returned home to a devastating sight. The grand oak had been brutally mutilated. Massive branches lay scattered across his lawn, and deep, deliberate gashes scarred the trunk, exposing raw wood. It was an obvious attempt to kill the tree. His heart sank as he turned toward Carol's house. She stood on her porch holding a small handsaw, a smug smile stretching across her face. There was no question in his mind who had done it. Miller contacted the police and immediately summoned an arborist. The arborist confirmed the damage was intentional and severe, likely fatal to the tree. The officers documented everything but admitted that without a direct witness or confession, pursuing criminal charges would be difficult. Miller understood. If justice was to be served, it would have to happen through proper legal channels. He began gathering evidence. Detailed photographs, the arborist's written report, and a documented record of Carol's repeated complaints and threats. He filed a civil lawsuit seeking compensation for the tree's value and the cost of removal. Weeks turned into months as the case slowly advanced through the system. During that time, Carol's hostility intensified. She glared from behind her curtains and muttered sharp remarks whenever he stepped into his yard. Miller remained composed, placing his trust in the legal process he had devoted his career to. He knew eventually his day in court would arrive. When the hearing date finally came, Miller took personal leave from his judicial duties and entered the county courthouse, not as a judge, but as a plaintiff. He sat quietly in the gallery, waiting for the case to be called. Moments later, Carol strode in confidently, impeccably dressed, her attorney at her side. She surveyed the courtroom with an air of superiority, not once glancing toward Miller. The bailiff's voice rang out, commanding everyone to rise. The court of the Honorable Judge Miller is now in session. The room fell silent as the side door opened. Everyone stood, except Miller, who remained seated in the gallery. From that same doorway, another judge entered, Judge Davis, a longtime colleague of Miller's. Carol's attorney had seen the name on the docket and assumed Judge Miller would recuse himself, but he clearly hadn't anticipated this arrangement. Judge Davis settled at the bench. "We are here to hear the case of Miller versus Carol regarding a property dispute. Mr. Miller, please approach." Miller rose from the gallery and calmly walked to the plaintiff's table. As he passed Carol, he watched the color drain from her face. Her confident expression dissolved into stunned disbelief. Her eyes flickered from Miller to the nameplate on the bench and back again. The realization struck her with crushing force. The quiet man next door, the one whose tree she destroyed, was a sitting judge in this very courthouse. Carol began whispering frantically to her attorney, who looked equally shaken. It was clear he had failed to thoroughly research his opponent. The proceedings commenced, and the evidence spoke volumes. Photographs of the destruction, the arborist's expert testimony, documentation of her previous threats. The narrative was unmistakable. Carol's defense unraveled quickly. She attempted to argue the tree posed a safety risk, but the arborist affirmed it had been perfectly healthy prior to the attack. When Miller addressed the court, he did so without anger. His tone was steady and professional. He recounted the events plainly, speaking not only of the financial loss but of the destruction of a living monument that had stood for a century. He spoke of neighborly respect, of property rights, and of the simple peace he had hoped to find in his new home. Judge Davis listened carefully. After reviewing the evidence, he fixed his gaze on Carol. His voice was firm. The evidence presented here is undeniable. You willfully and maliciously destroyed your neighbor's property. Your arrogance and disregard for both the law and basic decency are deeply troubling. He continued, you may have believed your role as HOA president granted you authority beyond the rules. It does not. In this courtroom, you are not a president. You are a defendant who has been found responsible for her actions. The ruling was swift and uncompromising. Carol was ordered to pay the full assessed value of the mature oak tree, $50,000. She was also required to cover the $5,000 cost of removal and stump grinding, along with all of Miller's legal fees. The total judgment was staggering. Carol sat motionless, utterly defeated. The smug confidence she once displayed had vanished, replaced by the stark weight of consequence. She had chosen the wrong neighbor to antagonize. Her entitlement had driven her to break the law, and now the law had answered. As Miller exited the courthouse, he felt no triumph, only a quiet sense that justice had prevailed. Though he had lost a beautiful tree, he had upheld a principle he believed in deeply. No one stands above the law. The following weekend, he began planting new saplings in his garden, nurturing fresh beginnings and restoring calm to his sanctuary. The neighborhood, once filled with tension, felt noticeably quieter. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more content like this. I'll see you in the next video.